Thank you, of course, for hosting this and having everybody back. It's nice to see the community grow from basically just an idea when Swift was teased that it might be for Linux, and everybody was excited about putting it on the server, and seeing that it's grown so much to attract a lot of talent, a lot of big names, and then to bring people together like this just to talk about it and celebrate it and help it grow. And that's part of why I think the Workgroup is so important and such a cool project. Is it's really there to mature the ecosystem and to help Swift out. I think a lot of people aren't really sure what it is, and the ones that are sure what it is are less sure what we do. And so we wanted to take a minute, sort of talk a little bit about what we've done the last year, what some of our future plans are, and what exactly the Workgroup is. So a little bit about me. I was already introduced. It's all the boring stuff. I started as an iOS developer, then got onto Vapor, and then now I'm functioning as a member of the Workgroup. And so today, we're going to cover the background. We're going to cover a little bit about how you can participate or stay up to date on the Workgroup and the things that we're doing, how a package goes from an idea to becoming a recommended package in the Workgroup or by the Workgroup, and then some questions if you guys might have them, and then there's some other Workgroup members if they want to come up and answer if we have time, and we can get through all of that. So a little bit of background. When did it start? It started about a year ago with our initial forum post, and was really announced at TriSwift in September 2018. And then we actually came on in this conference and talked about it a little bit more. If you guys were in the initial community when Swift on the server first started, there were kind of some loose attempts between frameworks to do this. Essentially, we all identified that we were recreating a lot of work. I think every library had their own threading implementation. We all had our own HTTP parsers. We all had our own WebSocket implementations, and they weren't really compatible. And this created a lot of duplication and less good code. It meant that all of our code wasn't getting tested as much as it could. And we tried to kind of unify, but we really didn't have something to gather around. And then we decided to go back into it. We felt like TriSwift was a good opportunity. We were having conferences now. The ecosystem was a bit more mature. And we started with this first package of Swift Neo, which really fulfilled a lot of roles. We wanted all of the frameworks to adopt it, or people building sort of not recreating the socket code and all of the layers that Neo could provide. And most of the frameworks were at least already integrated or in the process of integrating or had it in their plans. So it was functionally a good package to start as a foundation. And we wanted to initially focus on some things that you'd think would be not so many disagreements about, like HTTP parsing, WebSockets, and networking. These, of course, if you're on the forums, there are a lot of different ways that people think these should be implemented, and a lot of the reasons are usually correct. So it's a lot of figuring out what works for everybody and making sure that we can be compatible. What is it? It's a collaborative effort between different groups in the server-side Swift world. It's essentially a steering committee. It doesn't have so much real power or authority as much as people give it. I kind of use the analogy of the UN, that it's different countries participating in creating laws to bind each other. But there's nothing really there keeping it. It's more just an integrity thing of people working together. And the important part to remember, some people think it's a part of Swift, and while Apple is a participant, it's not a part of the Swift language, and it exists across multiple code bases. So there might be a user that has a library that's a part of the Swift Workgroup, that's a part of our recommended packages, but that would live on their GitHub. That's not something that's going to be absorbed into Apple or absorbed into the Workgroup. I think we have one package with the async HTTP, but in general, the goal is to be distributed and propagate packages up as opposed to absorb them. Who is it? So right now, it's Apple, IBM, and Vapor, and we have a few members each that are working together. And I say right now because all of this is very temporary. Membership is contribution-based, and it evolves over time. You can go on to the GitHub and see a little bit more about the governance, but there's rules about members that can join, about how many members per organization, about how long a member can be a part of the workgroup before they have to either reapply or possibly compete for a position. And we haven't had a lot of that yet, but that we really wanted to set up governance early so that we wouldn't have as many problems going forward. As I said, evolving membership, this is going to change throughout time. Right now, I believe membership is capped at 2 years, and then you would have to re-up. So we're trying to set up, which is kind of a difficult thing to do for the long term to say that this isn't an Apple IBM Vapor venture, this is a Swift server venture. And while those are some big frameworks in the field right now that are working together, it's something that we want to have open, and we want more participation as other frameworks or projects or players in the Swift server community start to come up. And then, as I said, it's guided by SSWG governance. A lot of the initial roles and a lot of the initial things we did were sort of figuring out what we do, how do we bind that. You can find all of this online. I think every bit of information is very public and accessible. And that's sort of what guides who is a part of it and how that continues. What are some of its goals? So the main goal is to improve the Swift ecosystem and to make it more mature, and then to unify efforts. We don't need everybody building a separate socket library. There might be some really good ideas for things that are different, but we believe that we should figure out how to work together in a single library or work together to build something that works for everybody and to voice those concerns. It helps for just a million reasons. Having people on Neo has made the entire community so much more robust. We get to have all of the testing on the sockets for every framework hitting them. You get professional developers full-time. It just improves the entire experience. And then the last thing, which is probably the most important for end users, is recommending libraries. And it's really hard to quantify what makes a reliable library and what a recommended library entails, but that's something that we're seeking to do so that people can have reliability in the Swift ecosystem to know whether a package is good for production, which I guess is the million-dollar question. What do we do? So we define and prioritize needs. Looking at the Swift ecosystem, there's a lot of experience on the work group of people who've been in server-side world for a very long time. And they know what communities need, they know what's missing. There's framework developers like Vapor and IBM that have holes that we'd like to build or tools we'd like to build or things that we just can't do because features might not exist at the time. The other thing is Swift core team interface. We have evolution, we can interact with Swift. It's really, really nice the way the team has opened up to the community to participate. But sometimes the server-side concerns are a little more disparate, and having a unified voice that we can go and collectively sort of but participate with the Swift team and voice the concerns of server-side to make sure that we're being heard in the discussion and not pushed aside for iOS or these other things is kind of nice, and we can have some authority there. But sort of a collective voice is a better way to put it, I think. Technical direction. When people want to build a library, maybe they want to build some new protocol or some things, or they're not sure if this should be integrated into Neo as a pull request or a separate library. They can come onto the forums, and the work group members are participating there. They're familiar with the libraries. There's also other community participation there. So you can get a lot of information before you start a project, before you maybe waste a lot of time building something that is already on the roadmap for another project, or you can find other people building similar things and combine efforts as opposed to competing or trying to create two separate things that solve the same problem. The library tool, incubation and recommendation, that's the recommending packages and sort of defining how that is difficult, and then facilitating how and where those are recommended, so to make sure that they're going through enough testing, that they pass a certain set of regulations, or I guess a better way to put it would just be like steps or things that they're doing. And then the last thing, as I keep mentioning, is to establish regulations and governance around the group. So a lot of what the group does is sort of talk about what the group does. And it's kind of an interesting position to be in. So why do we need this? I mentioned earlier, is Swift production ready? That's the question that we probably all hear 100 times a week, which is kind of annoying, but we've been using it in production for a long time. I know a lot of companies are using Swift in production for a long time. It's solving a lot of problems. We saw some really cool presentations last year about people using it for image compression and things that other languages just couldn't participate in. So Swift is production ready. It's being used in production. But this question, usually what people mean more is how mature is the ecosystem. If you look at an ecosystem like Ruby, for most packages or most APIs, there's a gem, somebody's built it, a lot of the problems are already solved. So it's easy for a developer to get in and start a project. They don't have to build as much, and it's easier to sell to the people that are paying the developers to build. So we want to sort of provide that for Swift and avoid duplicating efforts. And then the library adoption is a big part, and there's sort of 3 different segments of that. One is availability. Does the library even exist at all? Has somebody built this for Swift? Or in Swift's case, is there a C library that can be interfaced easily? Discoverability. If somebody built this and they built a really good package, but nobody can find it, then it's not so useful in the end. And then reliability, which is a big part of what we want to do, which is quantify how much you can rely on that package. We all kind of have an idea when you go on GitHub and you see something, you can say, okay, there's a lot of commits, or I haven't seen any activity in 2 years, there's nobody in the Slack channel. We have a sort of a spidey sense about this, but at the workgroup we really wanted to quantify that through the incubation process. So when you go and find a recommended library, you don't have to do that yourself. You know that there's other developers using it, you know that it's tested, you know that it's reliable, and you can just go on and build your project. And what do we get from this? So the biggest thing is duplicating efforts, which I will keep harping on, and then tertiary libraries. So a lot of developers don't want to build something like Neo and go into the core level, or these other things. Maybe they want to build a product, and they don't want to build for Vapor or Katura or Perfect or these other systems. They want to build something for Swift on the server. So by having something like metrics be somewhat standardized, or everybody agreeing to participate with a single library, then somebody could build a metrics UI or some sort of log analysis that can better interpret your logs and maybe give recommendations for where you should focus, what are the bigger problem areas. And so if somebody builds that, it's immediately functional for Swift on the server. It's not functional for Vapor, it's functional for Swift. And then robustness and battle testing. If everybody's using the same library and everybody's using the same metrics UI, if somebody in the Katura community finds a bug, Vapor benefits from that, Perfect benefits from that. And I think the community as a whole is better off by these group efforts where they really matter. So what did we do in the last year? Some highlights. 9 official recommended libraries. The first was, of course, Neo, which is graduated as far as we have classifications of levels. But there's other libraries that have gone through the process. Some by users, some by the group itself, some from maybe from Apple, some from Vapor. So it's been a real participatory effort, which is nice. We have an official Swift Docker image. Swift deployment has always been an important part, obviously. And having an official Docker image on Docker Hub for Swift is just another step that we're all using the same thing and we're all improving it together. The governance and processes is a difficult thing to build, and you can find it all again on GitHub, but sort of defining the group and sort of thinking into the future and not just the immediate of us working together right now about what does this look like in 5 years, in 10 years? How does the group grow? How does it stay efficient? How does it stay serving its role in the community? Swift Backtrace, which is a nice debugging library for Linux that I know Ian is a little bit, I don't know, he says it doesn't do enough, but it does a lot. It's really useful. And then defining the incubation process about how packages graduate into being recommended packages. Being publicly accessible via the Swift forums, GitHub, and Swift.org. It's really nice to have official pages there to sort of add some, I don't like the word authority to the group, but some sort of accessibility and that it's an official thing in a way. A code of conduct, which is always important to have, and then some initial security reporting, which is sort of a topic we're still figuring out a little bit, but when you're using packages and you're depending on them and there's a security vulnerability in a package used by a package used by a package, how does that propagate up so you know that your users are vulnerable? The next sort of segment I want to talk about is participation, how users can get involved. And we try to make this as easy as possible. It's a pretty common topic of conversation, lowering the bar of entry and making sure there's different ways to participate. So the first is, of course, library submission. We all know that. That's the easiest one. It's not the easiest, but it's the easiest to conceptualize. But code is not always a participation. We always say this at Vapor as well. A lot of people think they have to submit a pull request or they have to build this cool feature or this big thing that everybody's using. But just using the libraries is really helpful. Writing blogs about how to implement them, helping with documentation, participating with help with other users on Stack Overflow and chat rooms. Reporting bugs with tests that fail in a way that the developers can fix them is even better. Design discussions. So a big part of what we're doing is similar to Swift evolution of sort of proposing how we want APIs to look, how we want code to function, and what functionality we want a library to provide. And so participating in this, how it affects you, if you see a library that's something you'd want to integrate, voicing your concerns in a public way on the forum with any sort of participation, again, helping users, just discussing, getting involved is always useful. So some of those channels, swift.org, we have an official channel there, swift.org/server. Right now, that's where our package recommendation list lives. It's a little bit lower in the page, but you can find it. And this is where you can find the general information, general updates. It's always sort of an improving, evolving thing. I'm sure there will be a point where the package recommendation list is maybe too long to live just here. But at the moment, that's where information sort of starts. GitHub. This is where we have our proposals go through, and you can find them listed and accepted. It's also where we define the group with all of the governance. It's how we update it. You can see all of the rules and things that we've provided for ourselves and comment on them or even submit updates if you'd like. And then Swift Forums, this is the most active place if you want to get in touch. This is where all of the meeting notes are released, all of the pitches and proposals go through here. Security updates is intended to funnel through there in a way. And just general communication. Anything you want to talk about on the Swift server, if you're just excited about stuff, this is a great way to get in touch. So the last thing I want to talk about is the incubation process, which I think is one of the biggest roles of what we do, especially now that the group is kind of established and we have some direction, and how that works. So the life cycle of a package is this pretty simple. You sort of identify something in the community that's missing. A lot of times people come from another community that there was a great package or something provided that they're missing. The next step would be to make a pitch, and you can go onto the forums. There's a pitches section. And that's a great way to find out all the problems with your idea as people come in and have a lot to say. From there, you would develop or work on your library. Maybe after your pitch, you found other people that are working in the area or other people that are interested in it, and you can combine efforts and sort of build that way. Or you might find that it fits better as sort of a feature on an existing library, and we want to combine things that way. It's just a great place to start and ideate together. From there, you develop and work on the library and build it to a lot of the specifications that were discussed. And then you propose an implementation with it doesn't have to be fully coded, but a good amount of code. And this would go onto the proposals on the forums as well onto GitHub. And then from there, if it's accepted as a recommended package, it incubates and refines over time until it becomes more mature, and then it's considered a graduated package. So there's a bit of a chart here. You can find this on GitHub if you just want to see how things move. And you can see there's some markings there for votes, which is what the workgroup would do to sort of, anytime a package moves to a different level in its graduation, there's a vote in the workgroup to sort of sit and look at it and make sure it's satisfying all of the things that it needs to. So starting with the pitch, posted the pitch section of the forum, as I mentioned. All libraries start here. I put an asterisk because not all of them did. I think some maybe jumped up a little bit that were more mature because the group started after libraries had already sort of qualified this process. It's about gathering feedback and just discussing. If you've ever participated in Evolution or the forums, people have a lot of different ideas. People have a lot of different ideas that are all correct and are still conflicting, and we have to sort of resolve that and find a way to get through that can make everybody, if not happy, accept that they can solve their problem. From there, the proposal starts, and this requires 2 workgroup members' sponsorship or approval. It's usually not so hard to get. If you've gone through the pitch phase, you should have some idea of whether or not the project has this. It moves to the new thread in the proposals section of the forums, and then a pull request onto the workgroup. So right now, all of our proposals have a folder on GitHub that is where they are accepted. The implementation should be based on the pitch feedback. It would be not ideal if you went and built a completely different library than what was discussed and expected from the pitches. And then additional information. So I don't expect everybody to read this, but I just wanted to include it because everything is very detailed, and we spent a lot of time trying to make these details and just quantify these packages and what things people are looking for at each level. And again, this is all on GitHub. It's all accessible. It's just it takes a lot to sort of sit and itemize the things that make a package reliable. And you don't think about it and it seems sort of obvious, but it does take time to sort of develop and work through. From there, there's graduation levels. Once a proposal is accepted and is voted in by the work group, the first level that it usually has is SANDBOX. It could request a higher level, but most come in here, and SANDBOX is sort of the starting point. From there, it's considered officially incubating, and then after an appropriate incubation period, it's considered graduated. And graduated is the highest level of recommendation. It means it's a reliable package, people are using it, it's something that you can rely on in your work and in production. So SANDBOX, as I mentioned, 2 server-side sponsors, and we think this is sort of safe to try, but treat with caution. API might change, it's not so active, and less about the code, it's about the project as well, as we've all seen projects start and die, and it's sort of an acknowledgement that this package isn't used by a lot of people, it's not being developed by a lot of people, and so there's a chance that you might not want to rely on it too hard, or just expect that you might have to put in a little bit of extra effort to keep it up to date with things. Swift packages are already a difficult thing. The ecosystem moves so fast. Swift moves so fast. People are on different versions. Now we're on the server, so we have different environments that we're deploying to. And keeping up with that can be tough. And SANDBOX sort of acknowledges that this library is new or hasn't really solved all of these problems yet. Next, it goes to the incubating period. This is sort of a step up. It has these basic requirements of 3 separate production use cases. If 3 companies are using this in production, there's a good probability that they're going to be finding bugs, that they're probably would be submitting code back if there's issues, or participating actively in the development. An ongoing flow of commits and contributions. If you build the perfect library for some system and it never needs to be updated, then I guess there doesn't need to be commits. But there's something to be said for a library that's regularly having pull requests and that people are submitting issues, really just having something be active, and then a supermajority vote. So this is within the work group, which at the moment is 6 members, so that would be a 4-member vote. I think for the most part, people wouldn't want things to not be unanimous, but we do have sort of governance in place to deal with situations that might not be so cut and dry. And from there, you get a graduated package, and this has quite a few more requirements than the others. You have to adopt all of the requirements, supermajority vote, Swift version support. This includes older versions of Swift. You have to do things like support new versions of Swift within 30 days of their release. You have to have CI setup for Linux and Mac for different Swift versions, unit tests and appropriate coverage. Needs to be using the official channels within the workgroup. For example, if you're using Docker for something, possibly for your tests, you need to be using that as well. You need to have some definition of how the project works. It doesn't need to be as specific as, for example, the workgroup, but how does a user submit a pull request? Do you have a code of conduct? Are you accessible? Is there a chat room? Is there a way to get in touch with the developers? But some codification of how users can participate in this library, as opposed to just sort of leaving it open and unknown. And you'll notice most mature libraries have this already, and so it's kind of just an acknowledgement of that. And then documented release methodology. Everything we want projects to go up on the cloud, we want them to be used in production, and we want some sort of indication of how users use this library. If it's a perfect library and it's just sitting with code without any information on how to use it, it's not so useful to the group, and it's not going to be as easy to graduate. So then the last thing I'll cover is sort of the future and some of our focus areas going forward. These are always subject to change and moving around as things come up in the ecosystem, but these are sort of the rough areas that we've wanted to cover. Database drivers. In general, when we're looking for packages, we're looking for things that are less argumentative or less creative. When you get to the framework level, or you're building maybe a UI or some specialized library, it can be very specific to a small number of users and not so good for a work group. But things like database drivers, we don't all need to parse MySQL, we don't all need to parse Postgres, we don't need everybody writing their own Redis driver. And so having these together is a real focus area, and we want databases to be as solid as possible on Swift, fast, async, all of these satisfactions that we want. Distributed tracing, debugging is still difficult. It's still an issue on Linux, on different environments. If you've deployed in production and had crashes with nothing but some backtrace, it can be pretty difficult to get through. So that's definitely an area we always want to improve. Debugging makes an ecosystem more mature because it can move more quickly because people can solve problems more readily. Connection pooling. Connections are always a tricky issue in trying to get things through, and people have some different solutions and requirements. So this is kind of a big problem on how to satisfy multiple different requirements here. And there's a chance that it doesn't work out as well as people would want, but it's something that it's a goal on something we'd like to have. Open API, this is already being satisfied by some Swift frameworks, especially GitHub, and having some sort of unification around that to see what we can do in the community is nice. Linux distribution, Swift is starting to support more Linux versions, and we'd like to make that a higher priority, making sure that it's easy for users to get Swift on different distributions, making sure that we're getting tool chains for these distributions, and that people are utilizing them. Deployment is going to always kind of be a focus of the work group. We want people to get their things on the cloud, and anything we can do to help that. And then adoption metrics. So right now we're recommending libraries, but it's not clear who's using them. Vapor and GitHub have been very active about incorporating things, and we want to make that more public about who's using the libraries and how they're affecting the community already. And then to stay connected, as I said, we have these channels. These are the best way to stay in touch. And I post Slack, Discord, etc. You can find all of the people on the work group on the website or any of these channels. And most of them have some accessible Slack, or we're on Discord or Twitter. The community is pretty easy to get a hold of and participate in. So if you're maybe not comfortable for the forums, there's other ways to reach out. But lots of ways to get in touch. And we love when people participate, so as much as possible. And then I have some questions if other people from the work group want to come up and answer, or I can answer as well, if people just want to chime in.
Cool, thank you very much.